Hi, I'm Jazz Tankay, Austin's editor at Variety, and welcome to today's WGA panel on the Good Fight. I'm so excited for this conversation. So I'm just going to introduce the panel and let's dive right on in. So without further ado, we have co-creators, showrunners, and EPs Robert and Michelle King, co-executive producer Davita Scarlett, and co-executive producer Jackie Reingold. Hello and welcome.
Thank you.
Hi,
Thank
thanks.
you.
I am so excited, as I'm sure everyone else is, just to talk about season 4 of The Good Fight. But first of all, how are you doing writing in quarantine, in a pandemic? I'll start with you, Robert and Michelle.
Probably better than we'd be doing if we weren't writing during pandemic and quarantine. I mean, it's sort of, it's therapy, group therapy in the room.
It's very interesting because all these politics, the next 48 hours of politics are so intense, and we start every day in the room talking for about 45 minutes. If that changes anything in our stories, because you want your stories to be current, but not eclipsed by what's going on in the world.
Yeah. And Davita, how are you getting on writing?
I'd agree with Robert and Michelle. I mean, I do miss going into the room and being in person. I can't lie, but it is nice to have an outlet over Zoom every day to sort of digest what's happening in the world. So I'm appreciating that right now.
And what about for you, Jackie?
It's the same. It's such a great relief and pleasure to be back in the room because we had a very long break and so much happened that we all really like talking about the day's events, and we had a lot to catch up on, and we have a lot to talk about every day as we move forward.
I wonder what it's going to be like after, 30 minutes when you dive back into the writer's room after this to see what has changed in the world. But let's let's dive back into the beginning of season 4. That opening has to be one of the best openers I've ever seen on TV. It's like a fever dream where Hillary Clinton is president. Where did that idea begin?
Michelle and I kind of had thought about it. We love structures that are like bookended or repeats. And the first shot of the very first episode of The Good Fight was her being stunned by Trump's inauguration. So it seemed very interesting to have this be kind of an alternate history with Hillary being inaugurated. And from there, I think a lot of it was just cooked up in the writer's room about what, the dream that you have satisfied, but it becomes with its own curse, the monkey's paw of it. And the monkey's paw here was that an inevitability of that Me Too would not have happened. So I think that was all. I mean, Davita, Jackie, I'm just trying to remember. I thought that was a room concoction because I think the instinct Michelle and I had was just, wouldn't it be great that Diane sees where this is going? And the room is always great at curdling dreams. They find a way to make dreams really go bad. So I think it was partly trying to find ways that you do not get trapped into a one premise. That I would say is it.
Yeah. Do you guys remember anything else?
No, I think you covered it. I think we did have a lot of fun, trying to dream up what that world might actually look like. So it was a fun excursion for us.
I would say that we didn't know at first that it was going to be her coming out of the swatting the season before. I think we discovered that in the room too. And we had a lot of debate in the room of the rules. Could you only be in Diane's point of view, or could you be in other points of views? Given that in theory it was her, in a version of a mini coma, when you dream, do you only dream in your own point of view, or do you allow yourself to see other people reacting to you, even when you're not in the room? That would be the question.
What I love about the show is just how daring and bold the show is with the storylines and just everything. What is that like for you as writers to be in this room, and the freedom that CBS, writing for a show like on CBS All Access offers, say, compared to network TV?
Davita, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really thrilling. It's really fun. It's fun to, be on a show where we can throw out literally the craziest ideas and they actually might end up in the show. I remember I joined in season 3, and I remember season 3, I pitched something about like, Diane, she should go axe throwing. I had went axe throwing and I thought it was fun. And it was a good outlet for anger because you sort of have to put everything behind it to get the axe to stick. And, Diane was sort of dealing with a lot of anger that season. I thought maybe she could do that. And I just kind of threw it out there. And then ended up in the show. It's really, I think it's awesome that we have this freedom to just kind of explore and play. And, obviously not everything sticks, but it's really exciting. I think it's a great working environment to just be able to be that creative and kind of bring all of your eccentricities to every day.
Jackie, do you remember?
Yes.
Go ahead, Jackie.
I'm going to also add that one of the great things about working on The Good Fight is that there is nothing too controversial for Robert and Michelle. In other words, the more controversial and daring it is, the happier they are. So that is a freedom and a scary thing for us. So we can go anywhere because of them. And the other thing about them also is that if it has a kind of a good or evil or black or white quality, they're not interested. So more controversial and more complex is where our sweet spot for the show always is.
The only thing I would like to add is that the only reason we're able to do any of this is that we've got an ensemble of actors that can sell it. Because if we weren't working with absolutely top-notch actors, this would be catastrophic.
Because I know with the Jeffrey Epstein episode, the actors were wondering, what the hell have you gotten us into with this? And it was not supposed to be the season ender, but there was this sense, it felt like it maybe took us out of even our usual comfort zone into this bizarre, investigation down a path. So, I mean, what is amazing is these actors sell these things that are a little bit insane.
Yeah. And, what I love about it is just the fearlessness, like Jackie and Davita said, there's just this fearlessness that you have to approach topics. You're never shy from doing that. What draws you to that and championing those underdogs and those storylines?
I think it's the obsessions of the writers. I mean, I would want to take credit for it, but the writers are a very theater-based bunch. Not everybody, but so they became obsessed with slave play. I think Oren and Davita saw it first. Jackie, you saw it also first. And that's a theater, a play in New York last year prior to COVID. And it was a hit or mini hit in terms of Broadway, but it became this obsession. So what was nice is they just decided to turn it into an episode.
I would say the other thing also is when the writers start fighting in the room, when we all start yelling at each other, then we know someone will at some point say, I think we have a story. This goes into the script. We have a story, we have a story. So we're constantly hoping we're going to start fighting with each other, though of course we all respect each other, but the heat of that it lends itself to our scripts.
Yes, totally. I was just going to say, I think we have the best conversations in our rooms, and we do somehow, I think we fight almost every day, but it's great. It's great fighting. It's just, it's a good outlet. And I think we're always like learning. And as Jackie said, we do all respect each other. So we can like really go there and have those conversations. And I think the reason why the show is able to, push buttons and tackle sort of really interesting topics is because we kind of do all hash it out in the room all the time, and then we can kind of translate that to the show. So that's been really fun.
Yeah.
And we also laugh a lot. I'll just add one thing. There's an incredible amount of laughter, and I think that humor, because everyone who's living now, we sort of survive through seeing the humor, and that also gets into the scripts.
Yeah. Are you still having that rapport during, through Zoom? Like you're still having those arguments and
yeah, we're fortunate in that this is such a mature show, and that these writers have all been together for multiple seasons, so the relationships exist. We have another show where the room started during COVID, and while I think the product is great, the fun of it and the banter is not there because people don't have the relationships.
One of the things we decided to do was, a writer's room would go from 10 to 5 usually. But with Zoom, we're just going 3.5 hours total, just because the brain gets cooked a little faster on Zoom. And, it's difficult because I am like a school monitor keeping track of people who raise their hands. So like that is kind of the day for me, is making sure that I keep track of who. So it's a little bit more ordered, a little more like a school house, which is not as fun. Because I do think part of the argument is that people are overlapping and saying, what the fuck are you talking about? That's not true. And that you lose a little of that when I'm just there going, okay, now you, now you, now you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. If someone can figure out on Zoom a way to allow people to talk over each other without not being able to hear anything, that would be amazing, because I think we have lost a little bit of spontaneity, because it does sort of have to be, I think when we're in person, you can go from A to F to B to Z. And I think on Zoom, you do sort of have to go from A to B to C. It's a little bit more orderly, as Michelle was saying, just because of the nature of Zoom. And even what Robert was mentioning earlier about, we all sort of came into the room last year and we'd seen Slave Play and we talked about it. I think sometimes we've lost a little bit of that on Zoom. I mean, I guess we're not going anywhere, so there's that. We have nothing to talk about because no one has a social life. But there's a little bit less banter and a little bit sort of talking about our lives and our days and things. But that said, I think I still appreciate Zoom. It's kind of amazing that we've all still been able to write and produce shows over Zoom over this last year, despite the loss of spontaneity. So I'm curious to see. I think, what are we, like 2 episodes into season 5? So I'm curious to see how it'll keep going. But so far, so good.
Well,
Yeah.
Jackie, I was thinking the trans episode was really based on a lot of arguments, like vicious arguments in the room about what the Olympics rules should be for athletes. So, I mean, it's one of our more controversial episodes, and I do think that came out of the debates in the room.
That was the most contentious episode that I can remember us.
It was great. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we had started talking, it was a year ago we wrote that. So it was during impeachment, and we were talking about how norms were changing, but the law wasn't. And we thought, the Olympics was coming up. And we sort of put the two together. We started looking at issues around the Olympics, and we found out how they were having problems and figuring out guidelines for trans and intersex athletes. And the more we researched, the more the room fought and couldn't believe what we were learning. And it all went into the story.
On a similar front, Davita, I was thinking the reparations episode. No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
This is a joke. I was just going to say, I also remember when we were talking about the trans episode, one thing I said was, we don't know what's going to happen in 2020, but the one thing we do know is that there will be the Olympics. So I definitely said that. I remember that.
So this is your fault?
Well, Davita, do you remember the last card on the board for the last episode?
Oh my God.
Trump steals the election.
No, Trump cancels the election.
Trump cancels the election. It's the
Oh my gosh.
up there.
It is the card that keeps me up at night.
Oh my goodness. I bet you probably somebody's got a photo of that somewhere, and well, we'll see what happens. But I mean, talking about the news cycle, I think this is probably one of the best shows that has that crystal ball. Like, how do you filter out, especially this past year, how do you filter out which stories to focus on? I mean, there could be 100 stories in a day with this administration. So how do you, as writers, be like, we're gonna hone in on this one?
For us, I think it's trying to look to something below the fold, or what they used to call below the fold when it was newsprint. But something that is becomes an obsession. A good example is the last episode was that we ended up doing was episode 7, but it was supposed to be about an Errol Morris-like documentary filmmaker who at first seems to be interviewing Liz sympathetically, but then Liz realizes she's being set up. And so it's this interesting view about how documentary reality is basically based on how podcasts sometimes create controversies for entertainment value, but are not true. And we built it, we had it almost, I think it fully built. We looked at it and we're just bored to death. So we all just turned to each other and said, well, what interests us, and the argument that started out was about Epstein and whether it was a suicide or he was killed. And it brought up this idea of left-wing kind of conspiracies, because we're all aware of right-wing conspiracy, but were there left-wing one? And that just sent us down this path. And so then you just know that's sort of an evergreen, because unless they solve Epstein's suicide, it was going to be a controversy whenever we broadcast it, and it would probably be current because people were still writing about it on the internet. But I'd love to hear what, Jackie, do you have a take on?
I was also going to say, we look for stories that obviously that are going to give us story issues, not just enough to have an issue, but also ones that are going to create conflict amongst our characters. And that is what, in the similar way that we'll fight in the room, we want our characters to fight. And I think that's what helped us choose Davita's episode about reparations, because we could imagine how all the characters would disagree with each other. Yes, Davita, you think? Yeah.
Yes, and I remember when we did the board, we did go through the entire alphabet, and we had A, this person thinks that, B, that person thinks that, because we thought that there were so many different arguments around it. So I agree with that.
Yeah. Davita, talk about that episode. I mean, and just how, how you were going to approach, some of the revelations in that episode, especially with regards to race.
Sure. I mean, I think the main thing is that we weren't super interested in just doing an episode that was about whether or not reparations should happen or whether they should be distributed, because, I think that's that is it's a well-trod area, and it's not particularly gray. I think we all believe that reparations should happen. And so we were looking for, at least in the room, I should say, we were looking for a way into the story that had another level to it, another twist per se, that wasn't just about yes, reparations or no reparations. And I actually can't quite remember how we came to the idea of the way that we pivot halfway through the episode. But I think, post the Me Too movement, or sort of in the middle of the Me Too movement, there have been a lot of discussion about our new sort of, I guess I'll call it HR forward kind of culture. Not that HR is a bad thing. We need HR.
Very diplomatic, very diplomatic.
But, what was interesting was this idea that HR has sort of a new and improved and a little bit of a larger role in all of these corporate structures. But is HR always moving with the nuances with which to kind of address a lot of the issues that are coming up? And so that's sort of how we created this marriage in the episode between, we start off talking about reparations, and the firm is figuring out how to present it to the Democratic Committee as a feasible option. And then it pivots to, okay, well, Adrian Bozeman said the N-word in front of the entire firm, and now HR is writing him up, basically. And we just thought that was an interesting way to kind of get at this idea of the corporate world sort of, or at least HR kind of coming in sometimes with a little bit of a cleaver, when sometimes these issues, or oftentimes these issues, need a little bit more nuance and finessing. So that was an episode that, even though it does take this big pivot in the middle, it flows in this amazing way that I think it all kind of came together, and at the end of the day was really about this larger issue of, Blackness in a corporate structure and Blackness in American society at large.
And this is, I think we actually have to tip our hats to CBS at this moment, because it is shocking that we were allowed to do that. And not only that, I mean, they were complicit to the point where we called HR, if you guys will recall, and, asked them as like tech advisors, so what would you do? And we were very upfront. We weren't, being shady about it. We said, we're doing this for research purposes. How would this be handled? And then we went and clobbered it as satire. I mean, it's weird that we were able to do it.
And, you talked about having this amazing group of actors. How much fun is it to write for them? And they're so different. Like you said, like the bantering that goes on back and forth, and just the talent is insane. But to be writing for them after, all these seasons? What is that like?
Well, there was a
Michelle,
certain,
Robert,
there was a certain amount of guilt attached to it because we knew we had these extraordinary singers and we didn't give them a note. So then in season, was it three? Three, that we decided that okay, everybody's going to sing a little bit. We're not going to do a musical episode, but everyone's going to sing a little bit because this is just obscene. So there's that.
They challenge us a bit. We start every year taking in the main cast members into the writer's room and spend like 2 hours with them, where everybody asks a question of that actor and finds out a little bit of what they've been interested in, what they're continuing to be interested in, what they thought worked and did not work the year before. And I do think the writer's room is great at absorbing voices, which is, because I do think all the cast members come in with a slightly different voice or even a massively different voice. And I think all that the writers love writing towards them.
Yeah. Jackie, did you want to add to that?
The only thing I want to add is that the history of the fact that the show, some of the characters come from The Good Wife. And if you think of the years, if we look at Diane Christine Baranski's character, how she's grown and developed, and the luxury and joy of being a writer and being able to develop a character like that. I mean, you don't get to do that anywhere else. And to have an actress like that who's like, give it to me, more, I want more. And she can do anything. And so we try our best to keep her growing. It's a pure pleasure.
Yeah. Davita?
Yeah, I mean, I think casting chemistry is magic. It's you never know what's going to happen, and we've somehow been blessed with an amazing cast that all have awesome chemistry with each other. So it's just really, it's amazing and fun to be able to write for them, knowing that hopefully everything we write is just going to spark because they have so much spark amongst them. So that's always a pleasure.
And, Robert, Michelle, I've been talking to you for the longest time. And I think, you had a diverse writers' room going way back before it became, everybody started, before the spotlight was on it, talk about the importance of having that diversity so that you can tackle the stories that you do.
Well, the importance is just to hire the best writers that are available. And if you do that consistently, that's what you're going to get. And I find it peculiar that every show doesn't look like that. I mean, it never occurred to, it's just self-serving on our part. You just are always trying to hire the best writers because otherwise your job is too hard.
Also, I would say it extends to directors too. Not that this is about that, but one of the things we found is some of our best directors, other shows weren't picking up on them for whatever reason. So it was actually great. It was an opportunity. And I don't know if the same thing was good, the same with writers, because when we like writers, we just hold on to them. We're like the New Yorker. We don't let people go. We just hold on to them forever. So I do think it, actually, I will say what's very interesting is with this, the agents action over the last year with the Writers Guild, where people had fired their agents. Everybody thought that would be bad for diverse writers. We found it to be a boon for writers and writers.
And young writers. That was the other one people anticipated.
But it would turn out it was just the opposite. We got on Evil, which is one of the other shows, the writers' room is more diverse than any of the shows, and I think younger than any of the other shows. So I would say
senior writers stepped up during that action so beautifully. We got emails from writers, some of whom we worked with, some of whom we didn't, just saying, I want you to be aware of this junior writer who's looking for a job and you should read them because they're fantastic and nobody has agents, so let me bring them to your attention.
Yeah. One thing that's so great, something else that's so great about the show is just how, you have this thread of, truth might be different, but facts are indisputable. Like, how does that apply, like, throughout? How do you keep that applied throughout the season and in specific episodes? Like, how do you keep that recurring?
Well, I'll just talk because you two seem to be thinking. I will say it's been easy these last 4 years because the show has been finding the worst thing that could have happened in America is the current president. This is happening as Trump is still president, and that it was an undercutting of truth on every front and a breaking down of guardrails. So shows are always best when they have something to fight against. So what was good here, the good fight, seemed to work with this idea that we were fighting against somebody who was tearing down the concept of truth and using facts. You know, everybody has their own facts was the headline of this administration. And so what do you do when you're fighting in court and you need to foster facts to your argument? That would be mine. But I would love to hear what would you say?
No, I think.
Jackie, Davita?
The only thing I would add is that we also have a sense of humor and we're a bit cynical about the progressive end of that as well. So we try our best to, with our progressive characters, show that similarly they use facts in a way to benefit them, and they're quite hypocritical constantly, as our worldview of the show is. And even as storytellers, we're aware of how we use story to illuminate certain things that we believe in, and we try to actually put that into our scripts as well.
Yes, I mean, I think the show has always been great at reflecting the tone of the world, and the tone of the world in the last 4 years has been surreal. So it makes sense to me that the show is sort of playing with facts in that way and kind of playing a little fast and loose sometimes, because sadly the world and the government has been doing the same. So I think we are being influenced by what we are reading and seeing outside all the time.
What are we going to do after January 20 when, you know, we get Biden and Harris and things calm down?
You know, the problem is to be living in interesting times. It's also good to be writing a TV show during interesting times, because there's sort of a shared reservoir of understanding of what's happening in the world, or there should be. And so the show plays into that.
Yeah.
I think I would just add that I think some of us, you know, we've learned a lot about our country in the last 4 years that maybe we thought but weren't sure was actually true, but is true, and that won't change.
And being creative in quarantine is difficult when we're surrounded by like the same four walls. Like, how do you break that if you get a creative block? Like, talk about the motivation.
Yeah, I mean, our muse is panic, and our muse is deadlines. Deadlines are impossibly strict in the TV we do. I know there probably are worlds like Netflix or sometime FX where turn it in when you want. You know, we want it to be good. It's like that's never a way to create creativity. The best way to create creativity is you got a deadline and it's impossible, but we need it. And while you're doing that, you have to edit. And while you're doing that, you have to cast. And while you're doing that, so that I think is the real challenge during the pandemic, is how to do all that while still cooped up in a room that is 12 feet by 12 feet.
And I have to admit, I think writers probably in general are very well equipped to be at home for a long time by themselves, staring at the same four walls. Very similar to the lives we lived before the pandemic hit. So I think that helped in terms of being able to maintain creativity, because that's kind of what it looks like even before the pandemic. When you're writing, you're kind of just sitting in front of your screen and trying to make things happen. So I think it was a little bit of a continuation through 2020 in some ways.
Jackie, did you want to add to that?
I'll agree. I hate to admit it, but in some ways, you know, it suits my personality to have to stay home and be alone a lot. I mean, it's a terrible thing, but personally, the good part about it is that, you know, I don't have to feel bad that I'm not going to anybody's parties right now.
A lot less excuses to make in 2020.
Oh my goodness. Well, Robert, King, Michelle, Jackie, Davita, thank you so much for this conversation today on The Good Fight. It was incredible. And I look forward to talking to you again. We'll see what happens in season 5.
Thank you.
good.
Thank you, Jazz.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jazz.
Thank you.